Morning. How many people in here remember getting their very first paycheck? Yeah. Well, not everybody here, but most of you have. And I remember the first time I held a paycheck in my hands, it was like the best feeling in the whole world. I felt like such an adult. I looked at that thing and I earned every penny of this $117, and I was so excited. And it was a liberating feeling. But there was one caveat. I looked at the bottom of that paycheck and, oh my word, they took money out. It was kind of shocking how much money that I had earned I didn't get. It went to the government. I didn't feel too bad about it though, because I knew that that money was being spent by the government for things like roads and schools and other things that we need in order to run our society. So that assuaged my horror just a little bit. But I probably wouldn't have been so happy about it had I done this presentation first when I was like 14 and got that. So that's what I have going to be sharing with you today. I'm going to be sharing with you about corporate welfare. Now, you're probably familiar with the term welfare. It's the term that is commonly used to refer to any monies given to people that they haven't earned by the government for programs like SNAP or Medicaid or Medicare. Well, corporate welfare, those are subsidies, monies given to corporations for various things, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. That's what's the first slide. What is the corporate welfare? It's the subsidization of corporations and wealthy individuals, money given to corporations by the government. The largest of those is the agribusiness subsidies. The largest percentage of corporate welfare spending, 40%, went to the Department of Agriculture, most of it in the form of farm subsidies. Now, when you think of farms, do you think of mom and pop cattle on their tractor, looking wearily over their 100 acres, wondering how they're going to make it to the next year? Well, that's kind of what I thought too, but actually the sad fact is that most of these subsidies, 45% of the $7 billion that's awarded each year to these farms goes to the largest 7% of farming entities. So only the very largest, top 7% of these corporate farms get 45% of the subsidies that are given out in any coming year. And those are cash subsidies, so it's money directly paid to them whether they need it or not. There's no gradient, and there's just the farm bill that went through this past year that's aiming to change that, those direct payout schedules, but in the past, that's exactly how it's been. Which brings me to my next point, tax shenanigans. The most shocking statistic I came across in my research was that some large corporations pay 0% in taxes, and actually it's a little bit worse than that. Because the reality is that these are the dirty 30. And these are all about lobbying and taxes expenses. It's like one versus the other here. That's all really tiny print, hard to see, but you can see a lot of companies you may recognize like Duke Energy, DuPont, Verizon, Wells Fargo, Mattel. Toys are subsidized, that's kind of cool. And what I really want to bring your attention to though are these numbers right here. This is the company in this column. Domestic profit, federal taxes, effective tax rate, tax subsidies in millions. These two are what I really want to show you. See the little number? That's a negative side. So negative 10, these are in millions, negative $10,601,000. So it's not only a 0% tax rate, they actually get a refund on top of that of $10 million. That's the aggregated amount of all 30 of those companies. So their effective tax rate is negative 6.5%. And some of those companies, because it's an average, get far more than that. In the video I was going to show you from the Great Daily Show, he was talking about how in 2010, GE actually had a negative 60% tax rate. Wow. Think about that for a second. Negative 60%. That's unbelievable. And they are one of the worst offenders for shipping jobs overseas. So if you think that these subsidies are going to companies because they're keeping jobs in America, and have the best interests of you at heart, you might want to think again. So, which brings me to tax loopholes. These are how the companies manage to get away with all this dough. There are exemptions written into the tax code so corporations can avoid paying a tax that would ordinarily apply to them. Scores of corporate tax lawyers are employed for the purpose of finding and exploiting these. Scores more lobbyists are hired by companies to make sure the lobbyists that these loopholes will benefit them specifically. Of 280 profitable Fortune 500 companies collectively received $223 billion in tax breaks between 2008 and 2010, while contributing $216 million to congressional candidates over the last 4 election cycles. So that's kind of that's like a 10 times payoff. They contributed $216 million to campaigns. They received $223 billion in tax breaks. So they spend a little to get a lot more. The 30 most aggressive tax dodging corporations, the dirty 30 in the previous slide, collectively paid a negative tax rate between 2008 and 2010, while spending $40 million on congressional campaign contributions. Of the 534 members of Congress, 224, 98%, have taken a campaign contribution from one or more of these 30 corporations. So, yay, 2% aren't dirty. So, we're doing real well on that so far. And that's from Loopholes for Sale campaign contributions by corporate tax dodgers from the Citizens for Tax Justice. That's their website. Really great organization. They do a lot of studies on this stuff. Which brings us to our next section. My slides got messed up. How did that happen? Let's see, hold on, I'm going to roll with that here. Bear with me for a second. Here we go. That one. I'm really sorry about this, folks. Okay. Individual tax dodging by the wealthy. All right, so I always kind of wondered, what do you do with 5 homes? Like, you can't live in all of them at once. Well, the purpose of having 5 homes, at least in part, could be a tax shelter. A third of all housing subsidies in the form of mortgage deductions on the income tax went to the top 3% of homeowners last year. Now, according to the Huffington Post, more than 2/3, 69.2%, of the $76.6 billion in mortgage interest deductions went to 13.5% of taxpayers with incomes over $100,000. Almost 1/3 of these subsidies went to the wealthiest 3% of taxpayers with incomes over $200,000, some living in mansions. So these are very wealthy people. There is some good news though. During the food fight that was last year about the budget deficit, when they almost shut down Congress and stuff, they pushed through something called the Pease provision, named after former Representative Donald Pease. It's a complex limitation of all itemized deductions that includes charitable donations and mortgage interest. So that's basically a really wordy way to say that it eliminates up to 80% of deductions for taxpayers above certain thresholds. So the top 1% of filers. The effectiveness of this amendment is yet to be seen, however, because it was just put in during the last cycle. We'll see this year, when people do their taxes, how much of a difference it actually makes, if any. Because as we've seen in the previous slides, they're really good at finding loopholes. So, brings us to our next point, is tax breaks. So, here we go. Let's go back to that. Here we go. So my example for that comes from my hometown. They are tax breaks and reductions in tax burden that corporations and wealthy individuals are required to pay. It's kind of self-explanatory. My hometown is a little place called Syracuse, New York. Many people know it because of its crappy football team and its awesome basketball team. And it's the biggest thing there is its college, Syracuse University, and also the attendant hospital. Those are the only 2 major industries in a very dark, dank, Rust Belt town that's kind of the polar opposite of Florida. The only thing that we really have going for us is a gigantic mall. Now, that's the Destiny USA Mall expansion. This is the way the mall was at one point, about 10 years ago. This is the expansion that was being built on, and this is what they promised us. The developer named Robert Conjol 15-year plan. This is the 6th biggest mall in America. So they brokered a deal with the city to get an unprecedented 30-year tax exemption. That means all this pays no taxes for 30 years. 30 years. Hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue to the state. But they're so desperate to have any kind of industry move in here, they agree. And the latest story on this is that he's now asking for another $20 million in tax exemptions in order to build the hotel that was part of the original plan over here. See, the only thing he really delivered on after 15 years and millions of dollars is this little bump out right here. That's it. That's where it stops. Like all this, the fountain of youth, the great outdoors, the inner harbor, a lake. That never happened. So he's now even holding them ransom, I guess you could say, for every little bit that he gives them that he originally promised. He basically says, I'll give you this, but give me some more dough. So that's been an ongoing issue in my state, and the saddest part about this is that in an area that's so economically depressed and desperate for jobs, most of the jobs that are going to be in this are going to be minimum wage. So that Canadian tourists can come down and buy designer purses. So that's probably the saddest thing about this whole thing. So the next thing here that I'm going to be talking about is how public R&D profits corporations. Big pharma. Those are big pharmaceutical companies. My example for this is going to be Gardasil. It's an anti-cancer drug, the key component of which was developed by the U.S. National Cancer Institute in conjunction with a bunch of other international organizations. And it was commercialized and given to Merck Co. The way these things work, this is part of the NIH, the National Institute of Health. They have a forecasted budget of $31.3 billion, and 10% of its budget, $3.5 billion, goes to research, contracts. So they contract this stuff out. So after investing all that money in developing this drug, they don't even ask Merck to buy it from them. They just give it to them. Merck posted sales of Gardasil of $665 million in 2015 alone. So they're making a huge profit out of other people's research. This also leads to a potential conflict of interest in drug development, as the same people who approve these drugs for safety are the ones developing them. So that's kind of a big deal. So, okay. So I originally had, I think what happened here is that my original slides this is not my original presentation, but this is not my revised presentation. What I wanted to say here is that what I always love about studying sociology is that it turns the accepted common sense view of the world on its head by revealing the truth behind the labels that we give things. So what I really want to reference here is welfare queens. You've probably all heard that statement. I've heard people apply to people who receive benefits from the government, usually in a very disparaging fashion. But who's the real welfare queens here? The single mom on food stamps in front of you at the checkout line, wasting your tax dollars with that $1 candy bar, or a corporation like GE with its negative 60% tax rate. So that's something to think about next time you're confronted with those situations. Thank you.
So we have quite a bit of time for questions if any of you guys have any questions for Ruth.
So the bump out of the mall that was built, is that been commercially successful? Like, has it attracted tourists, or has it?
Sort of. It's been minorly successful. Not all the shops in the bump out have been, all the retail space, not all of it's been rented. So they're losing revenue in that respect. What is there is a certain amount of tourist revenue, like I mentioned, people coming down from Canada to take advantage of the trade disparity to buy at our mall. But it's a return on investment. The city has invested this much money in this project through lost revenue, and what are they getting back for it, for their investment? Especially since, you know, every single district in the state of New York has been running a deficit for pretty much as long as anybody can remember. So that's kind of like a big issue there. There's ones we do have a little bit more time. One of the slides that wasn't in my presentation that should have been, that I really wanted to go over a little bit was the military-industrial complex as well. That's another big form of subsidization. Dwight D. Eisenhower came up with the term military-industrial complex to describe the relationship between arms dealers, the military, and defense contractors. And in the last 2 wars especially, there's been a lot of things going on with that. I read a report by the Commission on Wartime Contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan, which was published in 2011 by a bipartisan congressional committee. And their findings were that defense contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan raked in $139.2 billion between 2002 and 2011. $40 billion of that $139 billion went to just one company, Calibron & Root, or KBR, which is a subsidiary of Halliburton, who you may have heard of. It's the largest non-union construction and engineering company in America. And in the SIGIR, the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction, because they love acronyms, final report, Learning from Iraq, it stated that an average of $15 million per day, $15 million per day was spent in Iraq alone between the years of 2003 and 2012 during a reconstruction effort, with an estimated total of $55.19 billion over the same time period. But I haven't told you the worst part. This is the most shocking statistic I found in those reports, and that's in Iraq and Afghanistan over those 10 years, lost to waste and fraud through these contracting organizations was $12 million a day. That adds up to a total of $31 to $60 billion over those 10 years. So not only, and we weren't just, it's not just that we were spending $15 million per day in just one country, in just one front of this war. $12 million a day was just, no one knows where it went. It's gone into the hands and pockets of hundreds or thousands of people in these countries, completely unaccounted for. And the thing that shocked me the most about reading that in a report from our government was that no one knows. Like, I looked at this and I'm like, this information is on the internet for free. And I had never heard anything about this. So that was one slide that I really sorry I didn't end up in my presentation because I had just revised this last night and put a whole bunch of things in that I had to take out. But that was one of the most shocking things I discovered when I started looking into government subsidization.
So do they think that money went to the contract, like the American contractors, or went to like the Iraqis and the Afghanistanis in their country?
Well, Calibron & Root got $40 billion, but the second biggest category in contractors on that list was 39% went to local contracting companies. So anybody with, I don't know how they screen these guys, but there were hundreds. Like I wrote down like the top 40 or so in my research, but there were hundreds and hundreds of these contracting companies that sprung up in the Middle East in these areas that put in a bid for government services and received it. And there's very little oversight to those. So, you know, 40 billion went to Calibron & Root, 39 billion went to hundreds and hundreds of local contractors. So I imagine that's where a lot of the waste and graft came in, but at the same time, like, all the ones after that and before it were American contractors. So who even knows? No one. seconds later we're all distracted. So, because this report came out in 2013 and 2011, so it's been out there. But who wants to really read like congressional reports all day? Like, does anybody here watch C-SPAN on a regular basis? I don't.
So is there any good news?
Good news. Yeah, that would be a really good one. The good news is that there is some reform going on. Like I talked about the Pease Amendment that went through last year to limit people using their fifth home as a tax shelter and taking advantage of like charitable deductions and stuff to pay no taxes. In the last year with the new agricultural bill that went through, like I mentioned before, there has been a reform where they're not giving money as direct payments to farmers, whether they need them or not in the past. It's like everybody gets cut a check. If you apply as a farmer and you say, I'm a farmer, and they say, okay, here's money. They don't really, like, they like prorate it based on how many acres you have or whatever. Now they're going to say, you don't get money just because you're here. You have to apply for it because you've had a disaster and, you need backup because your crops are all gone because of a flood or a drought or a fire.
Have they told us what they're going to do with that money? Are they going to help our debt? Considering we have so much of it, and apparently there's enough companies that are making it that could pay for that debt, but they're hiding it and not paying it through taxes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of news. If the soundbite is that we have a 35% corporate tax rate, which is the highest in the world. However, that effective tax rate is much lower because they look good on paper by saying, we're out for the little man. We charge these, greedy SOBs lots of money, but 35% of their incomes. But they turn around and say, okay, we told all the people that you have a 35% tax rate, but here's some subsidies and stuff, so you don't actually end up having to pay that.